Hey guys, welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwikta.
This is Merps. You're listening to Smooth Jazz. We've tried taking a twist on the traditional Lightforge podcast. And instead of yelling over each other, we're just going to groove out,
This
man.
is going to be a calm Lightforge. It's going to be a calm Lightforge because I'm dying. And when people are dying, it's easier to be calm. Kind of ironic, but that's how life is. So, today's Lightforge is happening on a Friday. In case people are listening and wondering why we don't know the big news that Hearthstone servers have shut down, which came out on the 28th. We don't know that yet because we are on the 27th. And that news is not yet available to us. So here in the 27th, we're recording this to our live Twitch audience as usual, but we're doing this early because Merps is doing something. What's happening, Merps?
Lots of stuff is happening. I'm not going to be here. So, for all of you listeners out there, for the next week, you guys don't exist to me. All right. When I come back, I will care about you once again. But I'm going to Cancun.
Whoa.
See you guys. If you're somewhere cold, sucks to be you. Great to be me. Yeah, that's
Gotta
about
get
it.
those
All
Cancun trips in before we close the border to Mexico.
right. Yeah, basically. All right, man. So you're kind of bringing me down here. I can't keep on doing the smooth jazz thing. So I'm just gonna be normal.
All right, let's do this. You can be normal. I'll be calm. We're going to do a nice, like, you know how we sometimes like to try to teach you some stuff to the extent that it's actually us teaching you and not like just us making you worse players. We're gonna try that again. Because the meta's pretty stabilized these days, and we can talk more about like big time strategy some other time. For now, let's talk about this very basic concept. I think we just keep going like more and more basic because we talked about like a tempo swing, and we talked about what were we? What was our last like real deep fried meta discussion?
I don't remember.
Alright, well, we talked about tempo swing, and when we were talking about it, I was thinking about things that may be even more basic than tempo swing. Things that, I mean, you really should know, but the number of people that have actually given this, like, serious, deep thought is probably a lot lower than you think. And I keep coming back to this one thing that people don't talk about enough. Because it kind of, you can... It really is like, what do you call those things? Rabbit holes.
How was I supposed to guess that? Was I actually supposed to try and guess that?
No. That's me talking to myself. I don't know why you think you exist when we're on the Lightforge. It's
That's
just
true,
me
that's true.
talking to myself, and then you talking to yourself, right? That's how we do the Lightforge. But we do this, so you go down this rabbit hole, and you could go pretty deep in it, but it's very important, and it is just a very basic concept of what do you do on the board. This decision probably is something you're going to be faced with a couple times each game, and different players will tell you to do different things, and so many times, even when we play, we'll sometimes just shrug and say like, I want to do it this way because I feel it, right, or I think this is right. And there's just it's not very scientific. So let's just go deeper into this. So what I'm talking about is the very basic concept of whether we eat or trade up. So you wanna set this up for us, Merps?
Okay. Well, first of all, when you say eat, what do you mean by eat? Because that's not a term that everyone uses.
All right. So when I say eat, I mean like when you take something and you make it no longer exist
By
using your minion, because your
Okay,
minion
good.
is bigger. So your opponent has a minion and it's smaller, and you have a minion and it's bigger, and you eat the smaller minion with your big minion.
Right. So a Boulder Fist Ogre eats a Yeti, right? It eats the Yeti and it produces. So you have a 6/7 up against a 4/5. You eat the Yeti and then you have a 6/3, right? The Yeti is no longer. They clashed in an epic battle. the ogre came out with some, battle scars and wounds, but the Yeti is no more. It is inside the Boulderfist ogre stomach.
Yes.
That's how this works.
And so that is kind of the primary way you gain tempo in this game, right? You play a minion on the board, it faces against your opponent's minion, your minion is better, your opponent's minion dies, you still have something on the board. Very basic Hearthstone stuff. So that's one way you gain tempo. What's the other way you gain tempo? Like very basic on the board.
You put stuff onto the board.
Okay, well it's in the title after the word eat, so I was hoping you were gonna read that, but
I
I'll
don't
play
have the,
along with
I
with
don't have it up.
this.
So you are actually asking me
Alright.
questions that I don't have any clues
Wow,
about,
okay.
man.
So we'll go back to me talking at myself.
Yeah, you do that. You
So
do that, man.
the other one is trade up, Merps. Trade
Oh,
up.
trade up. For example, if you have a Duskboar and they have an Ancient Shade, that's value right there.
A Duskboar, for those who play the arena and so don't know these cards that don't exist in the arena, is a 4/1 minion for 2 mana. And an Ancient Shade is a 7/4 mana minion. So
That's guaranteed to hit their face for 7 when they draw the card.
yes.
Yeah.
So they trade evenly. And you're obviously getting a lot of value if your 4/1 can hit the 7/4. So that's just what trading up means. It means you're making a trade, both your minions are dying, but your minion is a lot crappier than your opponent's minion. So you're getting a lot of tempo by making the trade.
Got it.
If your Duskboar hits into their Ancient Shade, you get 6 tempos worth of stuff. Because he had 7 plus 4 is 11, you had 4 plus 1 is 5. That's 6 tempos worth of stuff. So that's 6 tempos worth of stuff. Now, if you ate something, like if you're going back to the Boulderfist Ogre into the Yeti example, that gives you... So they had 9 and you had 11. And you're going to... They're going to have nothing, and you're going to end up with 9.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you had +2, you end up with +9. You're gonna get a net gain of +7 tempo, right? And I'm just each tempo is a stat in this way of doing like really simple math. So you kind of see like a similar result, right? Like if you're just counting stats on the board, they're both efficient ways of gaining tempo and gaining the board. You do that a couple times, you have the board for good. So what we're talking about now is the scenario in which you have a choice. And this isn't because we've talked about the other scenario before, which is like your opponent has a 3/2, you have a 3/2. Do you hit his face or do you trade? And when do you do that? This is a little more complicated than that. And this happens more with good players and less with bad players because you need the board first. So this is the case where let's say your opponent has a 4/4 on the board and you have a 6/6 and you also have a 4/2. And you get your turn just started. They can both attack. So
I already feel uncomfortable with this. Like now I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's 20 things I need to consider for this scenario now. Okay.
Very simple, right? You can either eat the 4/4, right, with your 6/6 and end up with a 6/2, which is a totally decent card still. Or you can trade up with your 4/2 and kill his 4/4, and that's a win, right? It's a small win, but it's a win.
Yeah, it's a win.
So
they're both wins.
They're both wins. So you're just in a good position. But you may be thinking, well, I want to know how to win the game, not if I'm already winning the game, how to do even better. But the fact is, in these kinds of games now, this is no longer classic meta. You're always winning at some point, and you're always losing at some point in the game. And this happens a couple times each game before it's one of the sides loses for good. So if you can, after you're winning on the board, even if you're seriously winning on the board, you're still going to lose the game like a quarter to a third of the time if you don't know what you're doing. And we see people not know what they're doing all the freaking time with these winning positions, which is why you'll see us oftentimes just keep playing and be like, okay, let's see how we get back on this. We shouldn't be able to get back on the board, but the opponent misplays or does something, and it's these tiny nuanced misplays, and it allows us to get back. And so we come back, and it looks really awesome. And we're like, oh, remember how behind we were? Anyway, so it's actually very important to be able to control the lead once you have it. And this is the most frequently come upon situation in which you need to make a big decision, and it's going to affect how you control the lead. So you want to run down some of the things that we should be thinking about on this turn. Remember, you have a 6/6 and a 4/2. Your opponent has a 4/4. It's your turn. Let's say you have like 8 mana. Like, go. Like, you're in a pretty commanding position on the board.
Sure. So you have 8 mana. One thing to consider is just the reads that you have, right? So far. In terms of, if you use the 6 attack guy on the 4/4, well, now both of your guys are at 2 health, right?
Yes.
That's open to AoE from like every freaking single class. I think like every single class is, maybe not rogue, I guess. Yeah. But almost every single class has a 2 damage AoE of some sort, or they can punish you just with like, you know, some bomber plays, right? Lucky bomber plays as well. That's something you want to watch out for. And if you've been making reads as well, and you know that they've been holding back, like certain cards they haven't used for a while, maybe that's AoE if you haven't given them a good opportunity. So that's scenario number 1. Do you want me to keep on going, or should we stop?
So let's stop here for a second. Why did you start there? Why did you start with eating?
So because eating, what you're doing if you're going with the other move is inherently, like, in this sort of vanilla play world, right, in which no one surprised the other person, you were just dropping stuff, eating is the correct move. Like, because eating extracts the most value right now without regard of like the next turn or their counterplays, right?
Like,
You're
look at your
extracting the most
tempo.
value. Yes.
If you eat the 4/4 with your 6/6, you are removing 8 stats with 4 stats. So you have a net gain of 4 stats. If you're using a 4/2 to remove the 8/8, you're removing 8 stats with 6 stats. So you have a net gain of 2 stats. So generally speaking, in this situation, eating would give you 2 extra stats than not eating, if you're just counting up stats on the board, which is, maybe not like the most advanced way to do it, but it is a very general way to be able to tell how much tempo you have. And,
exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it would go on to a second point. Sorry, keep on going.
Okay. The other great part about eating that really is an even bigger thing than just stats is eating always gives you more attack on the board.
Yes.
Like, a lot more attack, because you don't sacrifice any attack. So you may only gain 2 stats on the board, but attack-wise, you gain 4 attack compared to the other plays, which is the trading up. Because you still have your 4/2. So that's 4 extra attack. So to whatever extent you get more like stats on the board, you get even more attack. Anytime you eat something instead of trading up, you're preserving additional attack for the next turn.
Yeah, that's something that you want to think about, because this goes back to our expectations podcast, right? Like, what are you expecting them to put out? Like, if you're expecting them to put out like 9 mana's worth of stuff, and you only have a Border Fist Ogre, you might not feel that comfortable, right? In terms of the number of attacks that you have, and also the amount of attack that you have. So you have 1 attack that is 6 versus 2 attacks that is 6 and 4, which is 10 combined.
Yep, exactly. And so you got to think about things, right? With the opponent tempo swing episode, we talk about the opponent's tempo swing. We're turn 8. We're going to their turn 9. So we have 8 mana. If we're about to use these 8 mana to, like, just drop additional minions, then maybe we don't care, right? Because we had a commanding lead on the board, and even if we trade up instead of eating, we're still going to end up with way more attack than we need, right? If we just put out minions with our 8 mana, your opponent, let's say it's his turn 9 afterwards, he's still not going to output enough tempo to be able to swing the board, especially because your 6/6 is so healthy now, because you didn't trade with it, because you didn't eat anything with it, so it's not damaged. On the other hand, if I'm using part of this 8 mana turn to play a Nourish, well, now, in order to hold the board, I can't afford to lose that 4 attack anymore.
Yes.
Because if I lose that 4 attack, my opponent plays normal things with 9 mana, and then he has the board. And that's huge, right? I just gave my opponent the board. So because I'm in such a commanding lead, it's not a bad time to play Nourish. But if I'm playing Nourish, that's one of the examples where you do need to preserve all the attack, and anything that is not preserving attack on the board is just the wrong play.
Yeah.
Like, in this hypothetical, we're going to go with a lot of, you should do this, you should think about this, but we're also going to tell you specifically what to do. Because there are certain black and white scenarios. So one of them is, if you're about to anti-tempo on this turn, preserve your attack on the board. Eat.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So if you are playing the Acolyte of Pain, right? If you are playing basically, if you're just slowing down at all, if you're playing like the Cabal Couriers, or if you're doing that stuff, yeah, try to preserve as much attack out there as possible. And that'll be correct about like 99% of the time.
Yeah.
Don't play all into their turn, turn 7 Abyssal Enforcer, right? Like if you can avoid that, that's great. But yes, generally that rule, even if you stuck with it 100%, you won't be wrong that often.
Yep.
So
so that's the benefits of eating. Like you want to eat generally.
The benefits of eating. That's the title of this podcast. I love it.
So you want to eat generally because it gives you more stats than the alternative, but you definitely want to eat if you're about to anti-tempo with your turn, or if you have a read that your opponent has doesn't have a hard removal, doesn't have a mass removal.
By the way, I'm wondering how many people right now, as they're listening to this, and later on as they listen to this in their car, they're like, damn, I really regret not having breakfast. Dude. Like, how many times can you hear about eating and then not be hungry? I'm getting hungry now.
I mean, how many times do you watch me stream and not get hungry? I feel like that's part of my my contribution to the Twitch community, is just to make people hungry.
Fantastic.
Okay, so that's choice 1. First option, eating. 6/6 into 4/4. Let's look at the other one, which is trading up. Why would you throw the 4/2 into the 4/4 instead? When would that be good? Because you get less tempo than the other way around. So why would you ever do something like that?
Because sometimes, let's say you're in a position that if you trade the 4/2 in, sort of nothing, and then let's say you put out 2 more minions, right? Like, and you say, this class that is in front of me right now, whatever it might be, there is no possible thing that they can do with like 8 mana that can disrupt this. Like, maybe like with the other move, it could have been Consecration, could have been this, could be MCT, right? Mind Control Tech. You are in such a commanding lead, and then like, let's say afterwards you put out a Sunwalker and another like pretty good minion as well. So you could have either like a 6/2, a 4/2, a good minion, and a Sunwalker, versus just a beefy 6/6, another good minion, and a Sunwalker, and they're like fairly low health as well. You're just like, I don't need it. Like, yeah, sure, it's good. I could have more stats, but against potential swing cards, against potential counterplays, like that is something I could shave off, not worry about, and it is just overall the safer play.
Yeah, so the board that, if you're in a commanding lead, the board that you always want to put out, no matter how aggressive or how defensive you're trying to play, the board you always want to put out is one really big thing. The Coke is getting to me. And
why are you drinking Coke when you're sick?
I don't know, it's all I have besides water. I've been drinking a lot of water too. So, okay, what was I say? Okay, so you want one really big thing, as big as possible, but 6/6 definitely qualifies. And then you want a lot of little things that provide, other stuff, like, so that you can poke things and you can hit enough things. So you want the big thing to avoid the board clear, and you want more little things because that way you get extra numbers of attacks, which gives you the flexibility to remove whatever your opponent puts out the next turn. Because if you only have like one thing and your opponent puts out 2 things, all of a sudden you no longer control the board initiative, right? Unless you have a removal, because you can only kill one thing. If you have 2 things and your opponent puts out 3 things, they could be 3 really crappy things. It could be like a doppelgangster, like an unbuffed doppelgangster, and you're still surrendering the initiative to your opponent. They'll have one doppelganger left. So to whatever extent, so normally you want as wide of a board as possible while keeping one big thing healthy. And trading up allows you to keep that one big thing healthy. So one of the things that you may want to do is look at your hand, because remember, you're about to play stuff for like 8 mana. Are you playing another big thing? Right? If your play this turn, if your only play that makes sense is to put out an 8/8, well then maybe you don't really care that your 6/2 is going to get injured. On the other hand, if your only play is to put out 2 Ice Ragers and Hero Power, you kind of really don't want to put all of your minions at 2 health. Like, even if you have a pretty good read on your opponent, I wouldn't risk it. So those are the different situations. And I want to one more benefit of trading up is you do get 2 more damage onto your opponent's face, which is important.
I was gonna say that, yeah,
because
the most important factor. Yes,
you would 4 damage to 6 damage. That's like plus 50% damage. That's like real, meaningful, impactful damage. Because remember, you're already dominating the board. So for each turn that you're not hitting him, all you're doing is giving him another chance to take the board back.
We're 1 turn closer to Deathwing, man.
Exactly. So you need to actually wrap the game up when you have the board. And there is something to be said for getting that 2 extra damage, especially if you are going to set up the board again anyway. So it lets you extract some value out of your cards before you overextend, right?
Yep.
What else? Okay, so one more thing that you would do when you're trading up. One more reason to trade up is if you want to save your big guy. So this is a pretty rare thing to do when I say save the big guy, not in terms of making your board vulnerable, but just because you want to extract more value out of the big guy. And this generally only occurs if you somehow like ramped into a really big guy. So imagine you played a 4-mana 7/7. And your opponent has like a normal like 4-drop or something. And you have a way of removing this 4-drop without touching your 7/7. Like a turn's already passed. Your opponent did not hard remove the 7/7. You know he doesn't have hard removal. So now you could eat the Yeti and get some value out of the 7/7. Or if you could do some trade or whatever to trade up into the Yeti, you could still keep the 7/7. And you know what's going to happen the turn after that?
You'll still have the 7/7.
And it'll eat a Pit Fighter. So your likelihood of having the 7/7 eat something bigger is incredibly high. And in that case, if it had eaten the Yeti, it wouldn't be able to eat the Pit Fighter anymore. It would just trade into the Pit Fighter. So that's still fine too. But maybe you really do want to extract more value out of the 7/7, and you want to like eat a Pit Fighter and then trade into a Boulderfist Ogre, right? Like it's the greedy play, and it generally only works when your opponent is somehow mana constrained and you're not, which means you've ramped somehow, or your opponent has destroyed their mana pool. But it is something to consider, and it's a consideration that's often made when it comes to the Flame Wreath Faceless for the 7/7. A lot of people are just like, oh, you go face. Why gives 7 damage to the face? You also go face if you're playing this card on curve, because you have options afterwards to get even more value.
Right. And that's always the problem. So part of the reason why you trade a lot, like why do you trade your 2-drop into their 2-drop, your 3-drop into their 3-drop? Because if something happens, if something goes wrong, your minion is outclassed. A 3 up against a 3 is good. A 3 up against a 4 is like, you are 1 turn away from your minion that you drop being outclassed, right? It just makes sense. But the 4-mana 7/7, it will be good up until turn 7, right? Like in terms of it will dominate everything on like turn 4, turn 5, and turn 6. Yep.
So those are some of the times in which you would trade up, and it would be the right decision to trade up. I generally point it out whenever I'm about to trade up, like, and when I'm making a play, and my explanation is usually something like, oh, because I want the 6/6 to stay at 6/6. And that's true, but like I hope we're bringing more color to why we want it to stay at 6/6, and why that's a different thing. Because the default, again, we were saying, right, is eating. The default is always to eat. So, anything else you want to add about trading up?
No, I think that's pretty good.
Okay. So, what's the one other thing you can do?
Ignore and go face.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
The
I was
Twitch
like the
chat
most
play.
important one.
You could also just go face. So why might you go face there? Besides the very obvious reason, if you're trying to finish your opponent off and you have lethal.
Because you're really good at the game and you've made the correct reads and you just know that there's no punish.
Yeah.
And it's really satisfying to hit face. There's so many reasons, man.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the reason, right? It's
Yeah,
because you're really
yeah,
good at the game and you've made your reads. Because if you just go face, your opponent now, like, look at it this way: if you ate something and your opponent gets a hard removal, he now can't use the hard removal anymore. If you trade up, your opponent gets a board clear. He can't board clear anymore. If your opponent has like some mix of like a removal and a minion or a removal and a taunt, whichever way you choose, whether it's eating or trading up, removes a bunch of combinations that your opponents can do to screw you over. It removes your opponent's way to get back into the game at the cost of not hitting face as much.
Yeah.
And by not removing your opponent's minion at all, you also get super heavily punished by a buff that you would not have been otherwise. So
Yep.
you're just vulnerable in all sorts of ways when you go face, which means that unless you do have lethal, or you have like 2-turn lethal or something, the really only reason to go face is, one, you're desperate, right? Like, if your opponent has anything, you would just lose anyway, because you need the damage now. Like, this happens a lot with Hunter, where you're just like, I'm out of
Right.
steam. It's time to go face. It's just time to go face. And if my opponent does something, he does something, right? I just need the damage. Because when you're desperate, even if you don't have the reads, you can be like, well, if he has these cards, I lose anyway, right?
Yep.
Or one of the ways you can also intelligently go face is when you do have the reads. In our scenario, a 6/6 and a 4/2, the good part about that is that your opponent doesn't really have anything good to do. Like, it's not like you have a 2/3 on the board that he can eat. Your opponent can't eat anything. He can't even trade up on anything. His only option is to trade, like, down. Unless he has some kind of, like, follow-up. If he has a small removal, he could use the 4/4 with the small removal to kind of kill your 6/6, which is still not great for him. It's better than just hitting into the 4/2, but it's still not great. And oftentimes you'll take it. So the way we had set up this particular situation, going face is not necessarily a bad move if you just have enough reads that your opponent is just lacking initiative. And you have to take these opportunities when you get the read, right? Like, which is hard. Like, you're wondering, like, how do you get a read? You get a read kind of accidentally almost, because you can't fish for these kinds of reads. Because to fish for these kinds of reads, you have to put yourself in a position where these reads, if your opponent has a small removal, you get screwed over. You don't want to, like, purposefully do that. But if you end up with the read and then you have the board in some kind of order, go with it.
A lot of times, like, so people ask, how do you make reads? It's not just about so there's a passive way to get reads, which is sort of asking yourself, like, what was good on this turn? Did they use it? No. What was their turn? Was it better? If it was no, then they don't have the card that we're thinking about,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
There's also an active way to get reads, which is to put pressure on them in one way or another, right? You pressure them to have extra damage. You pressure their face so that they kind of have to play a taunt or they have to heal up.
Yep.
And from that, like, if you put pressure on them to, like, have an additional attack, and you see that, like, they didn't abuse the sergeant, they didn't dark iron dwarf, they also didn't, like, cast a spell, and it was like something that they almost had to do because your minion was, like, really good, right?
Yep.
So, like, let's say they have like a 2/2 on the board and you have like a 6/4, right? If they have an additional 2 damage, like, they're taking that every single time.
They're doing it, yep.
So
So
if
they don't do it, they don't have it.
And the more pressure you put on your opponent, the more reads you'll have. That's always, like, true in terms of, because the more you do that, the more you force them to have to make a narrower set of plays. So when they don't do that, you have pinpointed exactly, like, you have exactly pinpointed that information. It's like basically, it's like a dark room and you're just like slowly like shining a light like across the room, and the shadows are getting smaller and smaller, right? So
Okay,
you like
that started, and I was like, oh god, where is he gonna take this? I'm glad you went this route.
what where'd you think?
I just when
Okay,
you start
dude.
an example with, okay, so it's a dark room, I'm like, oh god.
What? What? Okay, you know what? I'm not even gonna. I'm not. You know
I
what?
just I liked where we ended up
Okay.
though, and
Okay.
that's definitely right. This is like these are the things you think about. Okay, so we've outlined the three choices, right? Eating, trading up, and going face. And going face involves a lot of reads. One thing that I'll tie it back to benefits of to actually eating, which is that you're wondering why, like, because remember, if you eat something, you're vulnerable to board clears. If you trade up, you're vulnerable to hard removals. And you may be wondering, well, my opponent probably has like about as much hard removals as board clears, if not more. So why would I ever put myself? Wouldn't I be more vulnerable by eating? You keep saying eating's the default, but if I have no reads whatsoever, that seems to make me like trading up seems to make me, not any significantly less vulnerable. And one of the things is you already have a read that he doesn't have a hard removal. Every time you're in
Right.
this situation, that is already a read you have, because to be in this situation, he must have let your 6/6 live for a turn. So he needs to top deck it on the next turn, or he had to have something so compelling to do on that turn that he just let your 6/6 like live, and somehow kept his 4/4 on the board, being very vulnerable to be eaten by your 6/6. It's just like a really bad spot for him to be in. So if he could have done something, he would have. So every time you're in this situation, automatically you already have a read. This is a guaranteed read, which is he very, very much most likely does not have a large removal. And
Right.
so knowing that, it makes trading up a more attractive option than it would be otherwise. It creates scenarios in which you would legitimately trade up.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you would just eat things all the time if trading up makes you more vulnerable and gives you less stats generally, and there's all these things that make it worse than eating. Like you would just end up with 2 more damage to your opponent's face, and that's it. So that factors into it.
That does factor into it. So yeah, I think those are sort of the three main categories, and it really like whenever you look at this, oh, there's so much to think about. Like just the 6/6 versus their 4/4, and so you have a 6/6, you have a 4/2 versus their 4/4, and when you go into a turn, like you always sort of have to refresh. It's like, all right, what do I know? What should I play around? What's my turn? And there's really so much, because it's hard when like it feels bad when you're losing, but lots of times when you're losing, you only like your opponent is forcing you into a specific play, right? And you just make that play and you hope that's fine. A lot of times when you're winning, that's when you have like the
Yes,
20 different plays, right?
exactly.
And you know that like out of those 20 plays, there's good ones and bad ones, and there's ones that are probably gonna like open you up to something terrible, right? Like something actually terrible. And that's when you think about
So
what
you
are
start
the
in a dark room.
yeah, exactly. You
And
start in a dark room in which you know no information, and you are trying to you're trying to like see as much as possible, right? And then in order to do that, you basically shine a light from one source, and you see the light sort of like spreading across the room until the unknown is so small that you are basically able to guess like what's in there,
Yep.
right? Like even the if there is just like a square foot of darkness in the corner, there's like no gorilla hiding in there, right? It's like, oh, okay.
But the ogre ninja is just a tree, man. He'll trick you.
It's just a tree, exactly. But now we have Streetwise Investigator to unstealth it.
That's true.
It's true.
Okay, so yeah, so that's the deep fried meta. It's a very basic decision making point that almost anybody who wins the game will eventually come to in that game itself. Like every game that you're just not totally blown out of, you'll be in the situation where you have to make this choice.
Yeah.
And how you choose is going to affect like your win rate very significantly. And if you were just going on before either, so people are usually of either the mindset of I always eat, like that's a very common mindset, right? Because it's the basics, right? You know, you get 2 more tempo when you eat, so you're just always eating, and it's okay. But when you figure out when that you trade up and when you go face, and when those things line up, that's when it really opens up your game to be able to make the better choices. And because that board state, even though it sounds like you're up by a lot, is pretty much necessary for every single win, this exact play that we're talking about matters so much to your win rate. Because you're always going there if you're going to win. It's a necessary part. Like, it's not the boss battle. You have to, like, you know, get the board and then you have to find a way to kill them. But it is, like, a dungeon that every single player will face on the way to victory.
Yep.
Okay. So, that's that. Let's move on and do question from the GOAT. Question from the GOAT is provided by our patrons. Thank you guys so much, helping keep the light on and support the podcast, our tier list, our stream, all that good stuff. Patreon.com/grinninggoat. This question from the GOAT's actually going to be from me, and I was really wondering about this because I picked up Skyward Sword again. Like, this is Skyward Sword is the Wii Zelda game that came after, like, Twilight Princess. That was, like, I don't know, it came out like 5 years ago or something. It came out a long time ago. And I bought it, and I installed it, and I had this, like, big screen TV for the first time in my life, and I was all excited to play it. And then I loaded it up, and the Wii just looked so bad. Like, so crappy. I have the component cables, too, but it was, like, 480 like p or whatever, and everything was all blocky and everything was all blurry, and I just couldn't do it. I played for like an hour and I was like, I can't touch this game anymore. It just looks so bad. But I picked it up again recently, and I kind of got over the graphics, and it's been a really good game so far. And so I was just wondering, what back in the day, so we're talking about the pre-Wii days, like when the graphics were real crappy. So, I don't know, I'm going to set an arbitrary line at, like, the year 2000, which is when we started high school. So, pre-high school, what were the single-player games that, like, really defined your childhood growing up, you know, and how did you grow from those games, and what would happen if you, like, played a game that was very similar to it today?
Alright, see, you said it at 2000. I can go back to a game that was made pre-1990. Okay,
you have memory,
dude. Well, I didn't play, like, you know, it was released during that time, but I didn't play until later. Okay, I'm searching it up just to remember like screenshots of it. If any one of you out there know this game, super props, like mad props. I played this game so much.
Is it like the Diablo before Diablo?
Yes.
You're like, I knew it. It's the dude in the castle, and you can't move diagonally.
Castle of the Winds.
Yes, Castle of the Winds. It's so good.
Castle of the Winds, man. That was so freaking good.
That was PC gaming at its finest before Diablo.
Dude. No, a Castle of the Winds, and it's just, you start off, you're in a town, right? Your town is burned. You just, like, go up into the mountains, and, like, no, it's really
RNG. Total RNG.
It's total RNG. All randomly generated levels. You get scrolls for healing, and then to attack, you just, like, keep on pressing the direction,
of the enemy is at. Yes, right. Exactly. There's not even, like, a swing button. It's just, I want to move into that space. There's an enemy on that space. I hit that direction key.
It was fantastic, man. No, it was really, really freaking good.
It was random in, like, the old school sense, where you don't even know what spells you get, because you have to, like, find books, and they were all random. So you develop without a skill tree. To play it all. No.
Yeah.
You just, like, find a book, and you're like, oh, I can fireball now, I guess.
Yeah. No, it was terrible. But once you figure it out, it was ridiculously fun. And I played through that thing so many times, because every time is different, right? You get different items.
Do you mean, like, you actually beat it?
I beat it multiple times.
Oh man, I think I only beat it like once.
Beat it multiple times, dude. It was easy by the end. But and it was and you have like different enchanted items, different cursed items, right? And my gosh, yeah, that was like just insanely fun.
It wasn't
I
even
played that.
it wasn't even in real time, right? Like the enemies didn't move until you moved.
Yes, every time you moved, they moved. It was a
Yeah.
tile-based rogue-like game.
Yeah, so it's like
Yeah.
turn-based. So
Yeah.
when you move, the next turn happens. I remember this so well because when I was learning how to program, like in middle school or whatever, I basically built like my version of Castle. I love that game so much. I built my version of that on like Visual Basic, with a lot more limited like set of stuff you can do. But generally, it's a dungeon. You keep getting lower and lower. Everything's random, and that was like something. Oh man, that takes me back.
Castle of the Winds, man. I
Castle
know.
of the Winds.
It was apparently developed in 1989. Damn. That's a long time. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at screenshots right now. Yeah. Oh yeah, this brings me back. I might have to
Dude,
no,
we should do
no,
we should do a Castle of the Wind stream.
I think no one would watch that. I would enjoy it though. But is there a co-op? No, there's no
There's
co-op
no
in there.
co-op in there.
Oh my gosh, we just talk through it. Oh man, maybe. Oh, maybe. Oh, I remember. You get purses. It doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man. Like you always get purses.
You could be a woman? I guess I was always a man.
Yeah, yeah.
This was
yeah.
before I was comfortable enough with my gender to pick women characters.
Fantastic, dude. But yeah. Everyone got a purse for some reason. Huh. I guess that's how it was in the fantasy medieval world of Castle of the Winds.
That's actually, now that I think about it, I guess if I were playing Hearthstone and I was like in middle school, I would actually avoid all of the like female heroes. Because I'm thinking about it, I really would not have picked a female hero back in middle school.
Which is
It
weird,
really
man.
limited my class selection in Hearthstone.
I just play what was fun, dude. You got middle school you was too uptight, dude.
Yeah, no, it's true. Personal growth, right? I have shown some level of personal growth since middle school.
There you go.
That's a statement that can be made. Okay, card good bad time. You wanted to do this one, so I'll throw it over to you. And my voice is getting out.
It was, yeah, I mean, it was basically volunteered by the chat, but someone wanted to talk about Unlicensed Apothecary. I think it's an interesting card. For those of you who don't know, it is a epic Warlock minion. It is a demon, 3 mana, 5/5, and whenever you summon another minion, deal 5 damage to your hero, which is a ton because you're a Warlock, and HP is very important to you. But you are essentially getting 3 extra stats worth, right?
Mm-hmm.
You should be getting like 3/4 or 4/3, and you are getting a 5/5 instead. So that card is, it's similar to other sort of cards, like for example, Ventrico or Fell Reaver, in which overstated but has a drawback of some sort, right? The drawback is very different from those cards, but it is one of those overstated drawback cards.
Yep.
Now, it's one of those cards that has won me games, and it's definitely lost me games as well if they can play around it effectively, right? Like they play an Annoytron, or they just sort of force your hand, and then if you deal 10 or, I don't know, God forbid, 15 damage to your face, you probably lost as a Warlock. Yeah.
No, that was my only comment. I know you stopped, but I didn't have anything exciting to add after. If you deal 15 damage to your own face with your 2-drop or 3-drop, rather, you lose.
Probably.
Okay, but let's work this out. Let's work this out. So let's say you play it on turn 3.
Sure.
Right? Your opponent plays something, you hit it.
Yeah,
now it's your turn 4.
Nothing will kill your guy.
Nothing will kill your guy, except the Ice Ranger.
Yeah.
So it's your turn 4. You got to do something. What do you do?
Well, you play one minion.
Yes. You play one freaking minion, and you're happy with it, and you take 5 damage. So
if you're forced to play 2 2s, that's terrible because you've just spent 2 cards to play something that's probably a little bit overstated over a normal 4, and you've taken 10 damage.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that Warlocks work right now is you need your health. You need your health in order to play the Fellfires and Abyssals and tap in the late game. If you find yourself taking too much early damage, you are severely handicapped in the late game.
Yep. Okay, so you play one minion, and then what does your opponent do? Have to do something, and then what do? You trade it in, and it's dead.
You trade it in. Yeah, you trade it in instantly, and sometimes it's not even a good trade, but you trade it in instantly. Yeah.
So you get your tempo, because your tempo is just there. You've lost 5 health. You paid for that tempo, and you get a 2-for-1 card advantage-wise.
Yep.
That's what this card does when you play it on turn 3. And will you take that? Yeah, you'll take it.
Yeah,
You'll
definitely.
take that any day, because it's you get 3 stats essentially, 3 extra stats for that 3-drop for 5 health to your face. Think about a Pit Lord. You only get 2 stats for that, and that's like vaguely okay still.
Yep.
So this is earlier. It's more dominant, and in the late game, it's actually less penalizing, because in the late game, what happens? You play it as the last minion on one turn, and then the next turn, you have like half a chance of like just being able to kill it off, right? Like if your opponent has anything with 5 attack or more in the late game, this doesn't even have a penalty at all. It's just a 5/5, which is a bigger than average card, and it costs 3 mana, so you get extra tempo out a bit. And at most in the late game, you will like take 5 damage once. Actually, I mean that's not true. let's back it out. So, you have 10 mana. You played a unlicensed apothecary onto, let's say, your opponent's like empty board or something.
Right.
Your opponent plays a bunch of stuff, and they're all below 5 attack, which you could generally do like more than half the time.
Sure.
So
yeah,
now
definitely.
Your apothecary makes a kill or whatever, and is surviving to the next turn. Now, how many minions do you play on the next turn?
Right. Like it's.
What do you do there?
Those are the times in which it really is awkward, and it's. You know, just like how people are learning to take advantage of Ventricle Mercenary, for example, people are learning to take advantage of Unlicensed Apothecary. Like, one time I played it, and this is in the late game.
Like,
I was
take
like,
advantage of your opponent's this card. Or, like, your opponents are learning to take advantage of your this card.
Right, well people are learning...
Like you're learning how to use Unlicensed Apothecary, but your opponents are learning how to punish it.
Yeah, to punish it. Like, they'll drop, like, a Gilblin Stalker plus an Oasis Snapjaw, right? And I'm just like, wow, those cards really suck, but this really sucks for me. Because I just don't... At that point, like, the best I can do is, like, drop 2 minions, right? I can never drop 1 because it's, like, turn 6 or turn 7 or something. And then I can drop 2 minions, but then I'm taking 10 face damage. And after that point, because, you know, they still have, like, a Gilblin or something, they can just go face. And suddenly I can't use any of my cards, and... they just need 1 or 2 more cards to finish me off.
Yep.
You know? Yeah.
So in the late game, what you want to do is you don't want to play this card. Like, I know you want to get tempo as fast as possible, but you want to set it up so that you curve into a single big minion on your next turn.
Yeah.
Or that your opponent has a minion that is already so big that he can't kill it off. So you can always kill it off the next turn with your 5/5 and kill your 5/5 as well. Like, if your opponent has a Boulder Fist Ogre on the board that you never took care of, feel free to play your 5/5 3 mana. Because on the next turn, unless he does a weird, like, you know, Cyclotron Taunt or something, you're going to be able to kill your own minion.
Yeah.
But barring that, you want to curve your Unlicensed Apothecary into that Kraken. You know, into that Bog Creeper. Into whatever big card that you have. Like, don't play this out when your next turn is going to be 3/3/2/2. Like, that's bad, because if your opponent then blocks you off, you're screwed. You're going to end up playing, like, 1 3-drop hero power and, you know, wait for the rest of your mana to resolve.
Yeah, this situation that we just ran through, it gets pretty dangerous, right? Because even though, let's say, you know, in the late game, you drop your stuff, you drop your thing, and you're like, oh, look, it's turn 7, I should be able to kill off this 5/5. It's certainly easier to kill it off than the turn 3 scenario, in which you never are able to kill it off, right? But at the same time, the punish for you next turn in terms of using your mana with that thing is steeper, right? So, like, if they do drop, like, the Oasis Snapjaw with the Gilblin Stalker or Noitron, suddenly you're standing there, you're just like, gosh, like, what am I... Like, you need to plan for that, right? You need to plan for... what would happen if I just drop this? Do I have a play? It's sort of similar to, like, if you drop the Ventrico, you have to think...
It's very similar to Ventrico.
Yeah. It's like, if I drop the Ventrico, like, do I have spells? Like, if I have, like, if I drop the Ventrico as a hunter, do I have the deadly shot and the quick shot to follow it up, right? If I have both of them, I'm not scared of anything. I'm, like it's perfect. And then in 2 turns, I can probably kill this thing off, or I can just hero power and hit face and it'll be fine. But if you just play out the Apothecary in the late game, just like if you play out the Ventrico in the late game, and you don't really have a good follow up to their sort of awkward sort of throw a wrench into your play scenario, you could definitely just lose the game from it.
Yep.
And it's very dangerous. Yeah.
So we have it rated as 66, which is really freaking super high for a Warlock. It's below like an Abyssal Enforcer and an M-Gang boss and whatnot, but it's still insanely high. And we have it this high because most of the downsides, if you play this card intelligently, like we already said, right? If it's on turn 3, there's not really a significant downside. It's just a really good card.
Yeah, yeah.
On the other hand, later in the game, there's a possibility of a significant downside. But there's also a much greater possibility that you just don't get punished for it. So you have to know when to play it. It's not a card, like, it looks like just a 5/5 that's like a huge tempo thing and you just want to play it as quickly as possible. But past turn 3, that's not the case. Past turn 3, you have to play it in a very intelligent way. It's not the same as like a Flame Imp or a Pit Lord, where past a certain point of health, you may just want to like never play that card and instead like just use your hero power and get like, another card because you want to use your health more efficiently. This is a card where even if you're backed into that situation, you could probably find a way to play it without being punished the next turn, so that you have like a good shot of not even taking 5 damage. So yeah, that's why it's rated so highly. But it's even harder to play the Ventrico correctly after turn 3.
It's tough, man. Yeah, and then they play like, what was it? I think it was on Trollden where someone died because he had an unlicensed Apothecary and his opponent played Leroy for 16 damage.
With a Hungry Dragon.
Okay, that would be so sick. But yeah, man, that's also never play unlicensed Apothecary if you have an Imp Gang boss on the board.
Yeah, that's a bad idea. Or that like 1/1 that generates in them. Like nothing with Death Rattles on the board. If you have something with Death Rattle on the board, don't play this thing.
Yep.
All right, so I thought that was a good card, good bad. This is a card that is rated very high for Warlock, and it's very difficult to play. Like, very few cards rated this highly are cards that will actually lose you the game. So
yeah, so they'd have to be pretty freaking good, right? Because they have the potential. Also, it's mitigated by the fact that good, careful planning and skill will also mitigate its potential downside, right? Which is something that we definitely try to take into consideration with our tier list. Like, if you are a good player, you should be able to play better with this card in the late game. Because on turn 3, the average player and the good player, they're both dropping, probably. Yeah. Like, it's just way too good on turn 3. But afterwards, that's when you have to make some tough decisions.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode of the Lightforge. We'll be back next week, and there will be actually an Arena Coop next week as well. The reason there's no class talk this week is because there's no Arena Coop this week, because someone's going to Cancun. So wish Merps and Natasha a fun, well-deserved trip. Get some sun before you come back here into
I'm gonna be so tan. Oh my gosh, it's gonna be amazing.
All right, and see you guys next week then. Until then, this is Ablikton.
This is Merps. Bye.